Hi, everyone. Welcome to another live that we're doing here on Facebook. We are the Center for Education and Advanced Care Planning. Our goal is to bring end-of-life conversations to you, especially during this time on a virtual platform, kind of normalize those conversations so that they're more comfortable to have with your family members, and then give you some steps on what to do after you have those conversations. So what we're doing today is we are going to continue that conversation that we started a couple weeks ago with our first live on all-encompassing end-of-life issues. Today we have Steve Chupp as well as Ashlie Collier, and they will join us in this conversation to kind of talk about how COVID has changed a few things, what type of things they see in their fields. And so I'll just kind of read a little bit about them real quick, and then we'll get started. So we also additionally have Hannah Nichols. She's a communications and events coordinator. So she's facilitating this whole thing. So we really do appreciate that. Any audience questions as well that you guys have, comment below. She'll be able to see those and she'll pop on and ask those questions or send them to me so that I can ask them. So feel free to make this as interactive as possible. We also have Steve Chupp. So he's the coordinator for Honoring Choices, North Central Indiana. That's located in Mishawaka, Indiana. He's one of along 35 volunteer facilitators who provide advanced care planning in St. Joe, Elkhart, and Marshall County. So we love that Steve is kind of heading that operation and coordinating those volunteers to help get advanced care directives done in our community. We also have with us today Ashlie Collier. So she is born and raised out here, another native, and she's helped the community in which she's grown up in. She got her law degree from Notre Dame Law School, so in South Bend, Indiana, and then we got her to stay, which is always lovely. So she's worked in various advocacy roles for children with cognitive disabilities in both specialized treatment clinics and area schools. So there's such a passion for our community and community members there. So I think this will be a great conversation to have today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with the first question. In both of your fields and your profession, what should people be prepared to discuss when they come in to your office to see you? What should they bring with them? Ashlie, do you want to get started?
Sure. So I actually traditionally tell my clients for that initial client conversation, everything that I'm going to need to know, they will know off the top of their head. The purpose of the first meeting is really to get to know the client, get to know their family. Of course, family dynamics are going to play into some of their hesitation in how they're doing their end-of-life planning. Do we have kids close? Do we have kids far away? Do we have no kids? What kind of support system are we looking at? And then our goals for how we see them playing a role and in our end-of-life decision-making, and how we see them playing a role in their estate plan. So I have an interesting perspective in that I handle estate planning just for most folks, generally speaking, but then I also practice elder law. So estate planning and elder law kind of work their way into a very specific little niche. And I traditionally ask my clients, what keeps you up at night? What brought you to my door? And from those questions, I can normally get a good feel and have a pretty productive conversation. So no actual documents do I need.
That's pretty much the case in our situation as well with Honoring Choices, because we work with advanced care planning specifically. And so the thing that we basically want to have is a conversation with people when they first come in and say, okay, well, who would speak for you if you were unable to speak for yourself in a healthcare crisis? And with COVID-19, that's been unfortunately way too many times. People have found themselves in situations with COVID-19 where they were unable to speak for themselves. And so we want them to be able to find a healthcare representative, a surrogate, someone who can speak for them. So we say, okay, who do you trust? Who would be a good person to make decisions in those situations? Who would you like to share your wishes and concerns with? So that's one of the things that they can actually be thinking about ahead of time. What person would I choose? The number one decision and document that is in importance for people to fill out when they're thinking about advanced care planning is a healthcare representative designation. Who can I trust and who can I count on to be there in that situation? And then once they have that person chosen, we can have a conversation about what are your goals and values in life and what interventions at end of life would be acceptable or unacceptable to you. So the one thing they can be thinking about ahead of time is that person, and usually it's a family member or a friend that they can count on who would be there for them.
Wonderful. So something I'm hearing both of you guys say is that initially the conversation is what's going to happen. So before some of those documents happen, really a lot of those thoughts, getting to know each other, is really that important piece. And I think that that's something that will kind of reassure our community members that this isn't something where you need to print everything off, come with a big folder, have it all decided that day. This is, creating a relationship that's going to continue for quite a long time. So kind of along with that misconception, what are some other common misconceptions that people have in your field? And then, how can we kind of combat those? How can we reach our community members to tell them, hey, that first visit, we actually don't need that document, maybe. Let's get to know each other.
Yeah, there are some common misconceptions about advanced care planning, and actually there are too many. One of them is advanced care planning is only for extremely ill or old people. And so you think, why would I need to worry about this? I'm not ill, I'm not aged, I'm maybe even 25 years old. Why would I need this? But actually, a car accident can put somebody in a situation where they could not speak for themselves. And it could even present an illness like that, like COVID-19 or a car accident, could put them in a situation where, unfortunately, some very difficult decisions need to be made. And so another way to think about it is another misconception is that advanced care planning can only be done by a lawyer and must be notarized. So I want to put something out there really quickly, and that is Ashlie and I are not competing here. It's not like, well, either go to Ashlie or me, but I want you to come to me. No, actually, either of us do advanced care plans, and we actually support one another, because what we've done sometimes is people have completed their advanced care planning with a lawyer, but they've not had the conversation with their family, perhaps, about what their wishes really are. So we take the document that the lawyer provided and completed with them and say, let's talk about this a little further and make sure your wishes are known. And so those are a couple of things that we work on, and there are misconceptions that we approach that way.
What a wonderful thing to mention, that really within our community, a lot of these fields work together. So who do you start with? How are you supposed to choose someone? I'm sure most of, and both of you guys on this Zoom call have people that you may either recommend in other fields or that you've worked alongside. So Ashlie may say, hey, to continue this conversation, go to Steve, or vice versa. Steve, if you get someone, you can really say, well, additionally, along with this planning, let's think about the estate side of things as well. Another thing that I thought was really interesting that you mentioned was that misconception about age. Why should someone my age, for example, or if we look at Notre Dame right now, why should those students have conversations with their family as they're going back into a situation where during a COVID era where they're not easily, in driving distance from their parents, perhaps. Steve, do you want to maybe touch on how advanced care directives might change by state? How might you find some of those documents?
Sure. Yeah, the Indiana forms are available at the health department, and we can put that the web address out there. These advanced care documents, and the two that we recommend that everybody fill out, are healthcare representative appointment and living will. And those are available. They are state documents. So when you fill them out in Indiana, they're good for Indiana. However, if you were traveling to Milwaukee and you ended up in Wisconsin and had a need there and ended up with a healthcare crisis, typically physicians are going to try to honor the documents that you prepared from another state. They're not technically binding, but in spirit, they really say, okay, this is what the patient wanted, and so this is what we would like to provide. And your healthcare representative could help in that decision as well. So even though they're state documents, if a student from Notre Dame, for example, is from Milwaukee, it would be really good, though, to check with their state and find out exactly what documents they have and fill out those two documents. But they can be done actually in several states and are not competing with one another.
Wonderful. And, kind of along with that, what are some of the biggest challenges that families face within your field? See, we just touched on, families going away for college and that transition. Ashlie, what are some common, challenges that families might face within your field, and how do you kind of combat that?
Yeah, so I think Steve already touched on this, but the importance of the family conversation, the biggest thing that I find in a barrier to a successful outcome is the family not all being on the same page. And sometimes I have to be a little stern and remind family members that we're really not actually talking about their decision about what's happening with a loved one, but we're really just talking about what the loved one's decision is on how the loved one would like their end of life issues to carry out. So having the family conversation, making sure everyone's on the same page and hearing it from that loved one is much easier than everybody getting their own little separate documents and versions of what they think is supposed to be happening. So it's much easier to have this conversation on the outset and everyone just be aware. When a family faces challenges, it is 9 times out of 10, almost 10 times out of 10, if 9.9. It's not because the family has an actual disagreement. It's that we have a misunderstanding through the documents, that mom said something over here or mom said something over there to somebody else. When we're all sitting at the same table, we're all hearing the same information, and it gives us an opportunity to ask questions. So it's everyone being on the same page and understanding their role for their loved one that can be the challenge.
Interesting. And Steve, how might having others in the room benefit your conversation?
Yeah, Ashlie really nailed it. That's exactly the kind of situation that we've run into as well, where you have a family member, the initial person that we're discussing creating these documents and making these decisions, that person's in a healthcare crisis and they're unable to communicate, and the family is unaware of their wishes and perhaps in disagreement about what should happen as far as healthcare at that point. And so that is a huge challenge that people face, and it's very real in our day. And so, as Ashlie talked about, the important thing is to have your documents in place and really clear, but even more importantly, to have the conversation and for the individual to make it really clear to their family member and especially their healthcare representative what their wishes are. That challenge can be overcome preemptively, but the most important thing is to communicate clearly, and that's where when you have an attorney or a facilitator, like from our organization, that can help ask the right questions, then the family can express themselves well and make sure everybody's on the same page. And even if we don't agree, we know what, for example, mom wants done. And so we can agree with what she said, even though if we're not necessarily in agreement with how that's played out.
I'd like to add also, sometimes is derived from the documents themselves. So I draft healthcare power of attorneys in my office as opposed to an appointment of a healthcare representative, but they both are going to do the same thing. They both have the same merit and the same reason. My healthcare power of attorney actually just appoints a healthcare representative in the same breath, essentially. But it's important that I stress to my clients what the document doesn't do. The document doesn't tell your family every single choice. What the document does is appoint someone to act on your behalf when the choice has to be made. And there's a really important distinction there. And that's why we press these family conversations so much, because we can't run back to the healthcare power of attorney or the healthcare representative, appointment of healthcare representative, and say, okay, mom said if she might have to be on the ventilator for more than 4 days, please make alternate arrangements with my healthcare professional. The document will never be that specific. So it's really, really important that the conversation happens so that the family together can anticipate these different scenarios that we might find ourselves in. I think COVID is a really front of mind thing right now, of course. And what's hard is we're seeing with this illness that it can take different paths. And without having said where your threshold is, I have plenty of clients who want their healthcare professionals to go to extreme measures. And I have plenty of clients whose health, their threshold is here, or their threshold is here, or their threshold is here. And there's no way for us to know where your threshold is for these things unless you talk it out.
And another thing I might add to that, that is a clarifying point as well, is that when you appoint a healthcare representative, their responsibilities only kick in when you are unable to speak for yourself. So some people are thinking, I don't want to have a healthcare representative. They're going to be telling my doctor what I should have done for me. No, only in a situation where you are unable to speak for yourself would your healthcare representative have the authority and responsibility to make the decisions, and they would make those according to your wishes. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and kind of moving on to those personal stories and kind of what's influenced how you work. I'll get started with that. I did the facilitation process through Honoring Choices, and it was really enlightening to have some of those specific questions asked. If you were in a situation like this, where your chance of knowing who you are or who you're with is this percentage, what would you want? And then kind of going, oh, well, if it's that, I wouldn't want that. Well, at what percentage would you want to maybe change that? And those conversations were really helpful for someone my age who doesn't have children and who, isn't, very far from their parents. So how is my planning going to change over time? And being able to sit down with a facilitator and say, okay, well, if I do have children, if I do get married, those things may change. The person who I call may change. And these really are those living documents, in a sense, that they're not one and done. So to kind of jump off from there, Ashlie or Steve, what are some personal experiences or compelling arguments that have influenced your way of thinking around end of life?
I've had two of those that are really significant. Several years ago, my 92-year-old grandmother died. And when she passed away, she had pneumonia. She was on a ventilator and could not speak for herself. And my mom, that'd be her daughter, and my mom's brother were out in the hall trying to figure out what to do with grandma and whether they should keep these extreme measures going or not. And unfortunately, they disagreed. The sad part of it is nobody knew what grandma's wishes were. And finally, my mother, who is a little more sensitive to the whole issue and couldn't quite decide, gave the decision-making right to my uncle, and they made the right decision of letting her die a natural death. And so it was a difficult thing. On the other hand, not that many years ago, my father passed away, but before he passed away, he had kidney failure. He was on dialysis. It was not working. And at a Thanksgiving dinner, it worked out very appropriately. He had a discussion. He sat down there. I have 6 siblings. So there were 7 children sat down, the adult children sat down with him. And he said, what should I do? This dialysis is not working. Should I go off of dialysis? And we all knew what that meant. He ended up going off of dialysis with the family understanding why and being supportive. And the last week of his life was spent at home with his family and saying goodbye to him. And it was the most wonderful experience in seeing someone go, if you can imagine. And so the big takeaway for me was, if families express their wishes and individuals express their wishes, then this end of life thing does not need to be nearly as traumatic.
Yeah, I agree. I tell clients a lot, we're in a high stress situation. We're losing a loved one. If we're unclear about what their wishes are, it only adds to the stress of something that is already stressful. So absolutely, I second that. I've got my two examples are family related as well. My grandfather passed away in March. He is the first of my grandparents to pass away. I had the privilege of drafting their end of life documents as Grandpa's passing seemed to become more apparent. He was 85 when he passed away, fell down a lot. Heart conditions, there's a lot of things that were writing was on the wall. The incident that led to his demise, his heart failed him in such a way that an ambulance was called. He was kind of sustained at the hospital, but I remember the palliative care physician coming in I was there. This is like 2 weeks before COVID really started becoming serious. I was actually allowed to be in the hospital room with my grandfather and my mom and my grandmother. And the doctors were discussing, we can take this direction with Grandpa, or we can try these kind of exhaustive measures to keep him here longer. Or we can recommend that he go home and he pass away as we anticipate, probably within a week or so. I know that even though it was clear what Grandpa wanted, it was still hard to have to be the voice to say it. And this is something else that I discuss with my clients when we're discussing who's that right person to pick to be our representative. It is the person who's going to be able to say the thing that we would say if it were us ourselves. And I had a heart-to-heart with my mom, who actually happened to be my grandfather's healthcare power of attorney, not my grandmother. And it was very, very difficult for her. And they did end up, of course, doing the thing that Grandpa wanted. But even when we know, it's still hard. So I never want to minimize the fact that we can do all of the planning in the world, but when the time comes, it's still going to be difficult. So that's one. My other one is actually for someone considerably younger. My paralegal is my sister. And she is married to a lovely gentleman who struggles with, he has cystic fibrosis. And he is part of a group of individuals who all have cystic fibrosis. And just yesterday, she was relaying to me that she was probably going to need to take a couple of bereavement days because one of his support group members had chosen to actually cease treatment for her cystic fibrosis. Things were getting bad. There are all of these external circumstances that she was on a breathing tube, she's on other things. And she just said, I don't want to do this anymore. And she's receiving hospice care and she's going to pass at home relatively soon. So I do think it's also good to consider that we don't know what tomorrow holds. And this question of why should someone young have end of life directives? And it's just that we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know. And it's really easy to say, not me. No one thinks that they're the one who's going to get sick. No one thinks they're the one who's going to pass away and their family is going to have to be called on. So I do appreciate the fact that it's a little harder for folks who are younger, but there are plenty of instances that we can just pull out of the news even where something catastrophic happened to someone unexpectedly and now the family's in a big battle because we don't know what to do. So
I think, as a young person, it is definitely something of that feeling of invincibility. I'm in great health. Why would I need to plan for this? Because often when people initially think of end of life, they think of either passing away in an old age peacefully or something traumatic. And it really is important to have people understand that there's so many complications that happen in life. You know, that golden ticket idea of, you know, wanting to know when and where we're going to pass, that unfortunately none of us have that golden ticket. I wish we did. If someone finds it, let us know. But being able to have some of those conversations and have planning around, even while it can still be difficult when the time comes, it's also something that allows, you know, if something were to happen to me, for my mother to say, well, I'm not doing this. My daughter chose this. So I'm honoring her wishes, and really putting it in that perspective of honoring someone else's wishes that they've identified can be extremely helpful emotionally. That it's not you pulling the plug or making a transition or not pulling the plug and feeling any of those guilty feelings that you may feel, but it is, you know, this is what they've decided. So it lessens that emotion a little bit, hopefully, and without discounting those emotions that you do have. Any other thoughts on some of those personal stories or anything like that?
I think another concept that's really important to keep in mind is when we work with people, our organization is called Honoring Choices. We are honoring the choices of the individual. And as I go into that with an individual to discuss their advanced care planning and complete that, I make sure that they know these are their decisions. This is person-centered conversation and care. So I'm not there to direct them or to even recommend to them a particular course of care for them. I'm simply saying, what would you like to have done? And how could we best honor that? And that puts people at ease as well, because I'm not coming with a preconceived idea of what they're going to decide. They need to decide whether they want every extreme measure or whether they want to have minimal measures and more comfort care at the end and allow for a natural death. So that is entirely up to them, and I don't come with a set of my values. I want to know what their values are.
It's wonderfully said. And that's reassuring as well, that, you know, these conversations can be guided, but also led by the individual, because it's their thoughts and feelings. And having someone to kind of ask that can be helpful as well. It's hard for you to look in the mirror and ask yourself some of those questions, but to have someone ask with specific examples, or, you know, I've heard all of these scenarios. What's yours? I've never heard someone say the same answer twice for, you know, how do you identify, you know, what's a burden? What's your perfect day? Nobody answers those questions in the same manner. So really being able to have someone reassure them and reassure that their ideas and their thoughts and feelings are valuable even within the planning process is extremely helpful, and hopefully will help motivate some of the people watching, whether it be today or at a later date on this Facebook Live, to click some of the links below to find out how to begin that conversation. Along with that, you know, kind of keeping on that trend of COVID, it really has changed a lot of things for us. How has it changed the way people might view end of life planning, and how has it maybe changed some of the practices that you do?
Well, for us, it's obvious that we're dealing with a new reality in this pandemic. Millennials, younger people, when I was younger, I felt like I was invincible, and there was no reason for me to think about advanced care planning or even a will, any kind of a will. And so as the time has gone on, people have become much more aware, you know what, this does happen to people. And there are robust, healthy young people who are involved in life in their normal ways. And then suddenly they get COVID, they may end up in, now granted, it's a small percentage and that's great, but there are more people involved in end of life or life-threatening situations where they can't speak for themselves. The other thing that's really tough, I think, is something that I actually referred to a moment ago, and that is that people can become incapacitated and in the hospital and isolated with no family members there. And so two things come out of that. One is the importance of a healthcare representative that can speak for them. And secondly, that the state of Indiana has implemented some new laws. And I don't want to get into all the weeds there, but the details basically make it easier for the healthcare representative to give directions without being in the room. And also even for signatures to happen on documents without being present with the person. And I think that's been a real help for people who maybe are in declining health or maybe hit with COVID and are still able to decide on a healthcare representative and documents and to have those documents completed. So those are a couple of things that have happened. The other thing that I might add that's really important in this situation, because these things can come on so suddenly, is what you need to do with your documents. When you create a document, you do not want to put that in your safe deposit box where nobody can find it or get to it. You want your advance directives, your documents to be with your healthcare provider. So you want to provide that to them. You want your family to have copies of that. You want your healthcare representative to have a copy of that. And also one that people don't often think about is put a copy in your car. If you're in a car accident, the first place that first responders are going to look is in your car to see if there are any advance directives or contact information for a healthcare representative. And then one little snappy thing for the more tech savvy is there's actually an app called Milo, M-Y-L-O. It stands for Mind Your Loved Ones, in which you can put your healthcare, your advance directives on your app. You can scan them in, you can send them to other people in an emergency. The healthcare representative can have that same app, and it's a very convenient way to always have them with you.
I want to second the use of that Milo app too. Personal experience. My family and I were out bowling on my husband's birthday. It was probably 9 o'clock at night, and I got a frantic call from one of my clients. They were the healthcare representative. They said, "Hey, our loved one has been in a very serious car accident, and she likely will not live, and we need our documents now." And I'm not near my computer, so it's hard for me to send them their documents, but I was able to remind them, you have them in electronic version. And just like that, they were able to use their documents as they needed to in real time. It's funny, general durable power of attorney documents where we're dealing with finances, things like that. We're not dealing with urgent situations, but we really do not know the situation in which our loved one might need to use our documents. And I think that's a really good reason to use the app, have those things where they need to be, and just assume that it's going to be an emergency. And if it's not an emergency, then good. But maybe approach it from the worst case scenario. You'll never hear an attorney say that before. You have to assume the worst. So I want to get back to the basis of the question though. So COVID hasn't really changed the way I practice, although I will say, of course, I have had clients who the presence of COVID in their lives has created some anxiety where they feel like, oh, it was a really good reminder that this already needed to be done. So I'm getting calls on that regard. I do stress with my clients though, who are in that sort of mindset that I don't want them to approach their end of life documents in a panic either. This is something that takes some consideration, and we need to have a good, robust conversation about what's going to be happening with these. Pretend COVID was never a thing. Would we be making the same sorts of decisions that we're making right now if COVID were never present? And then how does the fear of COVID play into our decision making? Of course, masks, hand sanitizer, all of those sorts of things. The legal profession we didn't get shut down, but we had a lot more restriction on how we were allowed to meet clients there for a bit. We're kind of getting back into the swing of things, but electronic signatures, electronic notary, those sorts of things have made it a little easier to also be able to have these same sorts of conversations and get some work done so that clients feel like their concerns are being heard and that the ball is advancing on getting their documents done, even though we might not be in person. So a lot of my clients to date, we meet online, or we have a telephonic conversation, something like that, and then possibly we just meet for the first time face to face if we're signing something. So that's COVID.
Yeah, what a transition. But I think even with these Zooms, these lives that we're doing, there's the beautiful aspect of technology that you mentioned of, unfortunately in a extreme circumstance or an emergency, how are you going to be able to access these documents? Having them in your car, what a great idea, Steve. And then also that Milo app, having them at the touch of your fingers. So many of us have cell phones and have access to the internet, that being able to have these at the tips of our fingers now is such a resource. And while those apps may have existed before COVID, it really has highlighted their necessity during this time. Kind of along with those ideas, is there any other things that should be addressed today?
One of the things that I wanted to just mention about the Milo app is there is a small fee. It's $10 a year. And just want to let people know about that. But I would definitely recommend paying the fee because you get the kind of services with the app that are really helpful for you. I think another thing that's really important to keep in mind is that the services that we provide are free. And we want to help people complete their advanced directives. And so Honoring Choices has, as Elleah mentioned at the top, 35 trained volunteer facilitators that are trained to meet with you either in person or now in COVID and virtually through Zoom or Skype or telephonically. And we can help you get the forms, we can help you have the conversation and make that possible at no charge. That does not mean that you don't need to see an attorney at times. Sometime to complete your other things such as your will and estate planning, because that's not something that we do, but it's very complimentary what we do with each other. And I'm really glad to be on here with Ashlie. So keep in mind that that is a possibility. And we have many people who are interested in serving our community.
I'm not free. Sorry. Thanks for that, Steve. But I do really agree. These are complementary services. Our office is going to focus on an array of things that include end-of-life decisions. Obviously, Steve's office is going to be very end-of-life decision centric. So they're not going to be talking about financial matters, and we're not going to be talking about trusts and that sort of fun stuff. I want to encourage everybody. I agree. You don't need to hire an attorney for everything. Accessing the kinds of services that Steve's going to offer and their facility offers. If you've already got your estate plan done and there's no reason to call an attorney, they're going to be just as equipped, if not more equipped, to have some of these really specific conversations than us attorneys are. So we kind of look at end-of-life planning as part of a bigger picture, and they're really able to hone it in and stay focused on just that one goal. But yeah, I'm of course happy to help. And if you've got questions about that big umbrella of, estate planning and all that sort of fun stuff, I'm happy to help.
Wonderful. I think kind of going along with all of those pieces, having lives like this really makes it more accessible for our community members. So I do appreciate you guys coming on, having this available and having it share out, because this is going to be something that a month or two from now, when someone else is watching this and maybe it's past that COVID era, hopefully there's nothing new. We'll see as each month goes on, right? That these resources are still around. These resources have been around. You can now put a face to that resource. When you think of attorneys, you may have a preconceived idea of what that is, or what that's going to look like, and it may not be that. And hopefully having someone who's been able to have this conversation on a platform virtually can almost lead to that first initial introduction. And help go past that introduction. As we kind of finish up this conversation today, I do want to reiterate that even beginning these conversations with your loved ones before you contact anyone is a great opportunity and chance for you to explore what your own wishes are and what their wishes may be. Is there any additional advice that you guys might have for how to begin those conversations? How did you begin the conversations with your loved one?
That's a great question. And I think the way to start it is to talk about some stories. What are the stories that your family knows or that you know as an individual that you could say, you know, when Uncle Joe went through this, it made me think about what I need to be working on. Stories kind of open the conversation in a natural way and then can lead to some really meaningful conversations later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I have clients who, because I kind of invite myself to that family meeting after everything is set, they make a meal of it. You know, mom cooks dinner and we kind of all sit around the table and we know that that's what we're there to talk about. So I think just making the decision that today is going to be the day that we have the conversation, or I'm going to plan to have that conversation and we're all going to get around that kitchen table and do it. I think it's that decision that we're going to do it. That's the one to get over. And then once you've said, yep, I have a family who their children were scattered all over the country. So I actually showed up on New Year's Day to their house to have this family conversation because that was the only time we were all there. But it's making the decision that this is important enough to you and important enough to your loved ones to sit down and chat about it. Even if you never talk to Steve and I, still have the conversation with your family, please. That it's so, so, so important.
What a great example. And with that, I will turn to our community members watching and suggest that you take them up on those suggestions, whether it be an upcoming family Sunday night dinner or family gathering, end of summer, you know, socially distanced, mask wearing, COVID centric conversation. Begin those conversations and decide that today's the day, you know, seize that day type of moment. And again, links are listed below to contact both of these trusted advisors with us here today, and also to ask questions in those comments boxes. We'll be able to get back on those. And we're always here, Center for Education and Advanced Care Planning, to provide educational materials to our community, such as these lives, that will continue throughout the rest of this year as well, in a variety of fields with trusted advisors to address any questions or issues that you may be facing to begin that conversation in a particular field. So with that, I would like to thank our panelists so much. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your day. And thank you guys so much for joining us via, Facebook and Zoom.